Well, we're just about done the NHL version of the what ifs, and there's just one to go after this one. And of course, it's my team. I'm a little biased, but hey, Toronto deserves to get the last laugh, if you will. Anyway, yeah, got to do a lot of Cliff's Notes and all that stuff. Anyway, so let's talk about another Canadian team. Let's talk about a team that was one of the best dynasties of the 80s and 90s, basically had the greatest player of all time on their team, and then decided to trade him away to Los Angeles for what would be a decent return. But, in the end, it burned the city of Edmonton brightly. They did win a Stanley Cup after they traded away the greatest player in the NHL and all that. They had some fun and all that. There are some cities in Canada that you gotta love. And the fact that Canada's got 7 NHL teams compared to 1 NBA team, 1 MLB team, and 0 NFL teams for obvious reasons. You gotta love this team. They call themselves the City of Champions. Well, Montreal, by process, should become themselves City of Champions. They won 24 of these cups. Edmonton's only won 5. So let's take a look at the Edmonton Oilers and one of the biggest what ifs and one of the biggest missed Stanley Cups in NHL history. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's Cutter, what if NHL time? Tensions blow, the whistle blown, and the pucks go down the ice. Some teams just want to win the cup and do it with a smile. Hey, that is cool. Up on the River Nile. Oh, the good old hockey game. Who will come out on top? Will a team get through the cup by any means necessary? Oh, the good old hockey game. It's the best game you can name, and I'm have no shame. I will simulate those hockey games. Woo! So the Edmonton Oilers started life in the World Hockey Association. Of course, I talked about it when I talked about with the Hurricane, with Hartford, Winnipeg, and Quebec City. Edmonton started out life as the Alberta Oilers, going geographical, but then once all the games wanted to be played in Edmonton, they changed the name to the Edmonton Oilers. They were a decent lot. They won a few AFCO Cups, aka the WHA Championships. They had some pretty decent players like Len Patterud and Dave Dryden and Jim Harrison, and even Al Hamilton, who was so good in the WHA, the Oilers decided to retire as number 3, despite the fact that Al Hamilton never played in the NHL for the Oilers drop. The fact of the matter is that the Oilers were decent, and then they picked up this scrawny teenager in November 1978 in a trade involving the Oilers getting Eddie Mio from Indianapolis alongside Wayne Gretzky for Peter Driscoll. It was weird to see that Indianapolis had a WHA team. Of course, Indiana, not really much for hockey and all that. They love their Pacers and they love their high school basketball in Indiana. Trust me. The fact of the matter is that the Oilers had Gretzky and they even got Messier after Cincinnati folded in the WHA, and Messier was brought on by the Oilers. So Gretzky and Messier were on the same team in a sense, and Edmonton put off some finagling to make sure that Messier and Gretzky stayed on the Oilers once the WHA players were in the NHL and would have lose some players. But nevertheless, the WHA was the WHA. And the Oilers seem to be pretty cool and all that. Of course, Edmonton's the only one of the 4 WHA teams that went to the NHL that are still in its original city. Carolina now has the Whalers. Colorado has the Nordiques. And sorry, I got distracted there. And the Jets are now in Phoenix, now in Utah. So anyhow, the Oilers were okay. They made the playoffs in the first season in the WHA. They were decent enough. Gretzky was a star. He almost won the Art Ross Trophy. He ended up tied for first with Marcel Dion, but the first tiebreak is goals scored, and Marcel Dion had it. It's bad enough that Gretzky actually could have won the Calder, but didn't because of his WHA experience. So Ray Bourque took the Calder. Hey, Ray Bourque is a legend, not a one-trick pony. Famously, in March 1980, Gretzky dropped 6 points on the Leafs at Maple Leaf Gardens. And even what's more weird was that some fan decided to take live mice on the to Maple Leaf Gardens and throw them on the ice after a penalty shot call, bewildering Stan Weir, who took the penalty shot. Anyway, the Oilers got to the playoffs. The Flyers easily took them out, all willy-nilly. Then Gretzky exploded in 1981-82 as he scored 50 goals in 39 games. 50 goals in 50 games is hard enough, but he did it in 39, including 5 in that game against the Flyers. Gretzky was on top. Messier was trying to be a born leader. They added Yari Curry, Andy Moe, Grant Fuhr, Glenn Anderson, Craig McTavish, a lot of good players. The Oilers went to the final in 1983, got their butts handed to them by the New York Islanders. However, the Oilers soon learned after passing by the New York Islanders dressing room when everyone was just gasping for air and not celebrating the Stanley Cup. They realized that basically the road it's a hard road and you got to know how to take it, and they did. So they prepared mentally better. In 1984, they got to the Stanley Cup Finals and beat the Cupcakes, those known as the Islanders, defrauding the Islanders' drive for 5. The Oilers then won in 1985 a little too easily as Curry and Gretzky would put up point totals like you wouldn't believe. And man, if you watch that Edmonton-Chicago conference final, all the goals scored, oof. Of course, we're talking about the 1986 season for the what if. 1987, after the events of the previous year, they won the Stanley Cup. It took a while. The Flyers forced a game 7, but Glenn Anderson and crew won 3-1, and Steve Smith got his Stanley Cup moment. 1988, the Oilers looked good. They were dominant. They swept the Boston Bruins in the finals, despite the fact that they played 5 games in that final, because Game 4 was actually had to be suspended due to a power outage and all that. It would have been made up as the unofficial Game 7 with the score 3-3 with 15 minutes left in the second period. But of course, that was not happening as the Oilers swept it. A lot of people speculate that the Oilers may have done something so that Gretzky could win a Stanley Cup in Edmonton before he leaves for LA. Everyone knew that. The Oilers' brain trust knew he was going to go to LA, except for Gretzky himself. Gretzky basically was told that he could have kiboshed the deal, but he said he was too far in. And it also didn't help matters for Oiler fans that Janet Jones, a Hollywood actress, married Gretzky. Everyone called her Jezebel. She was threatened. Peter Pocklington was threatened with effigy and all that. Basically, Oiler fans were not in a forgiving mood. And who could blame them? In fact, an NDP, or a New Democrat Party, member of parliament, for the federal party, actually wanted to block the trade, saying we can't give up Canada's greatest resource to the United States. Fun fact, but it didn't happen. So yeah, Gretzky was traded alongside Marty McSorley. He insisted McSorley be part of the deal. And who else went? Yeah, and Mike Krusheletsky to the Oilers for Jimmy Carson, who was his teenage phenom, who unfortunately in his early career acted like a teenager terribly and got himself out of Edmonton because he didn't like Northern Alberta and went to Detroit. Alongside Martin Jelena and 3 draft picks and $15 million in cash Rooney. The Oilers would have to face Wayne Gretzky and the Kings in the 1989 playoffs, and they were actually up 3-1 on Gretzky, saying that maybe the Oilers didn't need Gretzky to win, but Gretzky proved otherwise. 1990, the Oilers went to the Stanley Cup Finals, despite the fact that they were down 3-1 to the Jets in the first round. Bill Ranford pulled something out of his ass, and the Oilers faced the Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals for the second time in 3 years and took them out in 5 games this time. In 91, they were bruised by the Minnesota North Stars of all teams in the conference finals. 92, they got back to the conference finals, but were swept by the Blackhawks. Their dynasty was gone. Players were traded away. Messier didn't want to come back to Edmonton. He went to the Rangers for Bernie Nichols and Stephen Rice, Kitchener, among others. Yeah, Edmonton lost their dynasty. Many of them actually found their way on the New York Rangers for '94 because the Rangers had an infinity for ex-Oilers. I mean, hey, if you want to win a Stanley Cup, get guys who won the Stanley Cup and the dynasty is in the Edmonton Oilers. You're not going to get people from the Islanders dynasty, like hell no. Although Greg Gilbert, who was part of the Islanders dynasty, did play for the Rangers in '94. Nevertheless, Edmonton took some time to rebuild. They built with Wayne Gretzky and Kelly Bookberger. Not Wayne Gretzky, sorry, Cujo. They shocked Dallas in the first round of the '97 playoffs and then lost in the second round. But then in '98, they were down 3-1 to the Avalanche. And it looked like all was lost. But then Cujo produced like Cujo could and made that famous stick save on Kamensky in Game 7. And the Oilers got to the second round but lost. The Oilers were trying to be relevant. Ryan Smith was trying to be a good player. Fernando Pisani, Chris Pronger even went to Edmonton for one season, and the Oilers went to the 2006 Stanley Cup Finals, lost to Carolina in 7, and then Pronger decided to shove off and go to Anaheim. His wife didn't like Edmonton. And Pronger won the Stanley Cup the next year. Edmonton tried to come back to relevance. In fact, in the 2010s, they had 3 straight #1 draft picks. A lot of people were saying that Edmonton was being rewarded for their shittiness. Roy Nugent Hopkins, decent player. Who else? What was that? Was it Neil Yakupov that got first overall? Well, anyway, but their third #1 pick worked out. Connor McDavid, who was this hotshot prospect or hotshot prospect. And the fact of the matter is that the Leafs should have had him because they had the worst. They had the best odds to get him in 2015, or Buffalo, but no, it went to Edmonton. And then they built the team around Connor. Draisaitl, Fogle, Zach Hyman, Stuart Skinner. You know, they had some great moments and all that. 2024, they got to the Stanley Cup Finals, and all was big in the City of Champions. They were down 3-9, forced a Game 7, but lost, and practically Connor McDavid was pissed off and crying in the locker room like a bitch. Sorry, but that's how I feel. And anyhow, they are the 2025 runners up again. This time in 6 games. I don't know what Connor McDavid's going to do. But anyway, regardless of that, I talked about Edmonton long enough. Let's talk about the 1986 team. Anyway, the 1986 Edmonton Oilers were playing. This was their 7th season in the NHL after coming from the WHA. They were looking for 3 straight titles and all that, kind of like the Islanders did. Edmonton won the President's Trophy when they finally decided, hey, we'll give this trophy to the best regular season team around. They put up 119 points and were heavy favorites to win the 3rd Stanley Cup. The regular season game, the Oilers had to face some legal issues. Dave Hunter was convicted 3 times for impaired driving in less than 2 years. Mark Messier had car troubles, and Craig McTavish was signed by the Oilers, even though that he had to miss the '85 NHL season, serving a year in jail for vehicular homicide. So anyway, the others still had first place. Gretzky put up 215 points and 163 assists. So those records will never be touched again. He won a 6 Art Ross and 7 Hart Trophy. He won the Hart Trophy every year that he played in the first 7 years. Well, he added 2 more, but yeah, that was weird. It's like, wait a minute, he didn't win the Art Ross Trophy? That was when Gretzky was a rookie and lost the points by 1 over Marcel Dion. Yuri Curry put up 68 goals, becoming the first Oiler to lead the team in goal scoring, which was not Wayne Gretzky. Paul Coffey put up 48 goals by a defenseman. Kitchener, even though he played half a year for Kitchener, I still yell Kitchener. He broke Bobby Orr's records and all that. He almost got the all-time defenseman record for points with one. He had 138, or had 139. He won the Norris Trophy. Fuhr and Moog would basically split time. Fuhr had the wins. Moog had the GEAA as in goals against. Oilers put up 119 points, 30 points ahead of Calgary, and another third, and 60 points ahead of the Jets and Canucks, who had to make the playoffs because 4 out of 5, which was great for the Smite division. You had all 4 Canadian teams made the playoffs. No Americanos. Yeah, it's funny how the Oilers and Canucks were separated by 60 points. That's the point. The difference in points was more than what the Canucks earned themselves. They had great months and all that. Their worst month, I guess, was January with 4 losses. So in the Smythe division against the Oil Drop, they won 7-3, 5-1, 5-1, scoring 17 goals while giving up only 5. Canucks were just not there. Fuhrer and Moog split time in that. But then the Oilers decided, hey, we need Fuhrer. And in a strange 7-game series against their provincial rivals, Calgary, the Flames won every other game. It went Calgary, Edmonton, Calgary, Edmonton, Calgary, Edmonton, Calgary. As far as we all know about Game 7, one of the worst games in all their history. Oilers were. Now, a lot has been said about the Steve Smith own goal and all that. But here's a major context. The Flames were up 2-0 in the game. The Oilers had to tie it by the end of the second period 2-2. And then there was a simple dump in, and Grant Fuhrer hit it for Steve Smith. Smith decided to try a risky cross crease pass to Don Jackson, his defense partner. And then all of a sudden, just before he releases his mouth, you hear it like an air horn. And then all of a sudden, the puck's in the net. Steve Smith banked it off Grant Fuhrer and into his own net. Don Whitman was just as shocked as we were, like when he was commentating for CBC. But yeah, Steve Smith banked it off Grant Fuhrer and into the net. Lanny McDonald was given credit because he was the closest Flame to the puck. But then they changed it to Perry Barrasan because Barrasan was the last Flame to actually touch the puck. Nevertheless, the Oilers still had time, but they couldn't tie the game, and the Flames, for some dumb reason, went to the Stanley Cup semifinals. They beat the Blues, and then they got taken out by the Habs in the finals. But the fact of the matter is that, Steve Smith couldn't believe it. And it was his 23rd birthday, too. Did the air horn spook him or something? I don't know. But I mean, why would you try a cross crease pass in the first place? Nevertheless, Steve Smith was upset. But Wayne Gretzky knew that Smith just made a little bit of a boo boo. So he gave Steve Smith the chance to raise the cup in 1987 when the Oilers won Game 7. Unfortunately, Oiler fans would not forgive Smith, even though that Smith played for 3 Stanley Cup champions with Edmonton. It got so bad, Smith just left for free agency in Chicago and basically told Edmonton to fuck off. The points were huge. Like, you have 4 100-point guys. Not even the Oilers of today could do that. Moog and Fuhrer were basically a goalie tandem and all that. Gretzky put up 19 points to lead everyone. Moog only played 1 game. Fuhrer was the goalie. So Gretzky won the Art Ross for scoring leader and the Hart for MVP. Paul Coffey won the Norris for best defenseman. Yeah, Gretzky set records for points and assists in the NHL season that year and all that. A lot of milestones. Esa Tikkanen played his first NHL game in 1985. Okay, Gretzky has got a 700 assist. Fuhrer is 100 win. A lot of things. Things. Steve Smith got his first NHL goal. Craig McTavish got his first NHL hat trick. Gretzky played his 500th game in December 1985. Gretzky got his 1200th point December 1985. Yeah, a lot of these records and all that, the playoffs and all that. Major trades. Edmonton had Gilles Meloche, a legendary goalie for Cleveland/Minnesota once Cleveland merged with Minnesota. So Minnesota traded Meloche to Edmonton for Paul Hoke. But Edmonton didn't feel like they needed Gilles Meloche, especially with Moog and Fuhrer. So what they did was they traded Meloche to Pittsburgh, good move, for Marty McSorley, Tim Hunowich, and Craig Muni. Pittsburgh was the team that should have got Wendell Clark first overall, but we're picking number 2 and got Craig Simpson, who would soon end up in Edmonton in the Paul Coffey trade in 1987. So yeah, so McSorley was a Penguin. I forgot about that. Oilers traded Pat Hughes to Pittsburgh for Mike Mueller. Mark Habishot went from Edmonton to Minnesota. Mike Rogers was traded from the Rangers to the Oilers for Larry Melnick and Todd Strube. They lost Pat Conacher to the Devils, but who cares? Willie Lindstrom went to Pittsburgh on waivers. They didn't really have a good 85 NHL draft, but they did get Kelly Bookberger in the 9th round when the NHL had 9 rounds in the draft. So yeah, they got Bookberger, who played 1,000 games in the NHL. So Anyway, it all worked out. So yeah, the 85-86 Oilers. That's one of the most unbelievable seasons, lost opportunities for a Stanley Cup in history. Fight me on that. Anyhow, let's see what would happen if the 86 Oilers did make the Stanley Cup semifinal. So the Stanley Cup semifinals would be between the Blues and the Oilers. The Blues winning the North Division. They had to fight off the Leafs in 7 games and all that. But yeah, the Blues would have played the Oilers. Oilers definitely would have had home ice. Grant Fuhr is your starting goalie because, he started it. And Greg Millen, I believe, was the starting goalie for St. Louis, RIP, because he just died earlier this year. Nevertheless, that's play of game one. And the Oil Drop crushed St. Louis in Defiant Powder 6-1. Summonin scored. Rhino Summonin, wow. Gretzky, Curry, Lowen, Jim Pathisi. Well, Pathisi scored for the Blues, sorry. So the Oilers had Pathisi. So anyway, it was 4-1. Gretzky scored again. Greg Millen was chased from the net, and Kevin Lowe scored again. Norman Barron, Ken Carlson, and the immortal Doug Wickenheiser with only 1 minute play. Rick Natras only played 2 minutes. That's unusual. The others had their chefs pick. Semenko and Kevin McClellan didn't get much time. Walmsley did decent replacing Miller. Gretzky, Lowe, and Krushenetsky, your 3 stars. So anyway, they go to game 2. They're like, maybe it was just a fluke. That wasn't a fluke. The Oilers crushed the Blues 9-1. Well, Greg Millen is definitely gone. Walmsley will have to start. The Oilers scored 6 goals in the first period. They were up 8-0 at one point. Paul Coffey, Kitchener, made first. Then Gretzky, Glenn Anderson, Coffey for the second time, Kitchener, and Mark Napier. And then Messier scored. Charlie Bourgeois got booted for cross-checking. Brian Sutter had to start the penalty. Moose scored to make it 8-0. Glenn Anderson made it 9-0. Mark Hunter actually ended up scoring at 17:29. Was Dave Hunter on the Oilers? Oh yeah, he was still on the Oilers. Yeah, 9-1. Walmsley faced 47 shots. Well, Millen started the game and it gave up 5 goals on 12 shots. Rick Wilson was the one injured. Wilson was injured. Bourgeois got ejected. Gretzky, Anderson, and Coffey are your 3 stars of the game. So on to game 3. St. Louis making a massive change. It will be Walmsley in the net, and it will not be Rick Wilson. He's hurt, so it's going to be Natras. We'll join Ramage on the back line. And St. Louis actually wins the game 8-7, despite the fact that everyone thought, oh, the Oilers are going to fall because, are going to be up 3-0. They scored all these goals, 15 goals in total. So, yeah, I'm not going to go through it. The goalie stayed on. Brian Sutter got injured. Yikes. Mark Hunter, the first star. Wayne Gretzky, Paul Coffey, the other stars. St. Louis, Mark Hunter with a hat trick. Brian Sutter, Joe Mullen, Doug Gilmour. Yeah, he was a Blue. Ron Flockhart. Remember him? And Bernie Federko. Oh, yeah, I forgot Joe Mullen was a Blue. Edmonton goals, 2 from Gretzky, 2 from Coffey, 2 from Curry, and 1 from Anderson. But the Blues won. Creepy. Game 4 would be an Oiler drop as they win 9-3. So Edmonton said that was just a fluke. It was a fluke. They scored 5 goals in the first period. St. Louis only 1. The only Blues goal in the first period was Brian Sutter. Gretzky, Messier, Napier, Anderson, and then Anderson again scored. Millen would have to come in net. Brian Sutter got ejected for charging, of all people. The Oilers made it 6-1 on a goal by Krushenetsky. Federko made it 6-2, and then Mark Hunter made it 6-3 for the Blues. Yuri Curry scored on the power play, then Coffey scored, and then Messier scored to make it 9-3. That is your final. Millen did okay in a sense. Anderson, Curry, Gretzky, your 3 stars of the day. So the Edmonton Oilers are up 3-1. The Blues know they're fucked. And they were fucked. Edmonton would have taken St. Louis out in 5 games. The game was close, 5-4 after 2 periods. The Blues got goals from Mark Hunter and Doug Gilmour. Napier, Tikkanen, and Glenn Anderson made it 3-2. Oilers made it 4-2 on a goal by Curry. Then Glenn Anderson made 5-2. Jim Pathisi got ejected for headbutting. Rick Wilson had to start the penalty. Gilmour scored to make it 5-3 for the Blues. But then Bourgeois got in trouble for charging, so Rick Wilson had to serve yet another penalty. Rob Ramage made it 5-4. The Blues were actually only down by 1. And then Glenn Anderson made it 6-4. Flockhart made it 6-5. So it was close. Coffey scored, then Curry, Napier, Summonin and Dave Hunter. Yeah, the Blues were down 6-5, and then they gave up 5 straight goals. It didn't matter who was in net. Anderson, Gretzky, and Coffey are your 3 stars. So the Oilers would have faced Patrick Waugh and the Montreal Canadiens. Because we don't touch the other conference. So yeah. Let's see what the Oilers would have, what Patrick Waugh could do against Edmonton. Game 1 was Montreal losing 9-4. Waugh had to be replaced in the first period. 5 goals in the first period. Anderson, Gretzky, Messier, Gretzky, Gretzky. Gretzky scoring a hat trick in the first period. Stefan Richer scored for the Oilers. Then Chris Nyland, imagine that. Shell Daly made it 5-3, but then the Oilers scored McSorley, of all people. Chris Nyland made it 6-4, but then Curry, Soman, and Grzelcyk scored 9-4. Sergio Momesso, Rick Green, and Gaston Gingras couldn't get much time in the net, in the game, and all that. The Oilers gave Semenko 3:10 and gave Kevin McClellan 8 seconds. Patrick Waugh 5 goals on 15 shots. That doesn't help. Gretzky, Kuznetsov, and Curry, your 3 stars. Game 2 would see the Oilers win 8-3, a little bit less this time. Simonin made it 1-0. And then Fogelin scored to make it 2-0. Anderson 2 goals. Paul Coffey made it 5-0 to chase Waugh again. Gretzky would score to make it 6-0. Naslund made it 6-1. Suominen made it 7-1. Ryan Walter and Brian Skrulin scored, but they're too little too late. Lee Fogelin scored again. Suominen, Fogelin, Anderson, your 3 stars. It's weird that Gretzky wasn't one of the stars. Suominen, Raimo Suominen, the immortal Raimo Suominen, the hero. Game 3 back in Montreal. Montreal knew they were in trouble, so you might as well start Sotart. Patrick Waugh just lost his mojo. And the good news is that Montreal gave up 3 goals. The bad news, they only scored once themselves. Bobby Smith made 1-0. Anderson with 2 goals. Gretzky scored 3-1. It was actually pretty good. Sotart did decent in that. Fuhrer, Anderson, and Gretzky, your 3 stars. Montreal shot Edmonton. So on to game 4. And you knew this was coming, right? Actually, no. Montreal wins 7-5. Montreal shocks Edmonton in game 4 and prevents the Oilers from sweeping. Larry Robinson, another former Kitchener Ranger and a defenseman, scoring. Suominen tied it. Dave Hunter made 2-1, and then Shell Daly made it 2-2. Chris Nyland made it 3-2. Maslin made it 4-2. Curry made it 4-3. Larry Robinson, his second goal, and Moog had to come in for Fuhrer. Nyland made it 6-3. Gretzky scored 6-4, but then Bobby Smith scored, and you know that game's over. Grant Fuhrer not doing well in the net. Robinson, Jolly, and Naslund, your 3 stars. But you might as well keep Grant Fuhrer on for game 5. I mean, you're up 3-1. Montreal is going to keep Sotart in the net. Because after all, you might as well. And it works. Montreal wins 4-0. Chris Nyland did get booted from the game for checking from behind. Marty McSorley got booted himself. Mats Naslund and Bobby Smith and Bob Gainey scored early. And then Ryan Walter. So somehow the Oilers are letting it slip away. 4-0. Sotart, Chelios, and Naslund, your 3 stars. So it's like, are the Oilers running out of time? They're going to put Andy Moog in the net. I'd be surprised if we have a game 7. And lo and behold, we do have a game 7. Edmonton loses 7-4. So Edmonton got a little too complacent. Edmonton's been too complacent. They're up 3-0, and then they chase Waugh from the nets. Sotart might do it. Could the 86 Habs do it? Montreal goals. Bobby Smith, then Naslund. Messier made 2-1. Smith 3-1. Momesso scored, and then Richer. Mo got replaced. Fogelin made it 5-2. McPhee scored. Anderson, Steve Smith, and Chris Nyland. Smith, Messier, and Naslund are your 3 stars of the day. So we got a game 7. Doug Sotart's on fire. What can he do? He's on fire. Well, the Edmonton Oilers won game 7 against Montreal. Shell Daleen scored twice to make it 2-0, then Gretzky 2-1. It was like, what the hell is with the Montreal Canadiens? Chris Chelios made it 3-1. Messier made it 3-2. Mario Tremblay. Oh, yeah, I forgot he was still a player in that league. 4-2. McSorley got in trouble, but Gretzky got a 10-minute call for unsportsmanlike conduct. McTavish scored 4-3. Then Messier made 4-4. Krushelewski made it 5-4. It looked like the Oilers were going to win the Stanley Cup. But then Craig Ludwig, of all people, scored to tie the game. And then in overtime at 15:42, Curry from Krushelewski and Gretzky made it 6-5. So the Oilers would have won the Stanley Cup. But I actually want to know if Wall was in net, would they have won the cup? Montreal. But anyway, Messier, Shelley, Naslund, your 3 stars. So Moose Messier does his job, and the Oilers would have won the Stanley Cup, their 3rd straight. Maybe they wouldn't have won 5 in a row to tie the Habs of the late 50s. So what if Wall was in the net against Fuhrer? The tea leaves see that. What? Oh, okay, yeah. So Wall would have been so bad that Oilers would have beaten the shit out of him. So yeah, so Montreal would have been screwed anyway, even if Patrick Wall was in the net. Yeah, Patrick Wall was sucking very hard. I don't know why. I mean, Patrick Wall was a good goalie, but yeah, Sotart would have helped them get to Game 7. But yeah, Edmonton would have crushed him. But yeah, it would have been drive for 5. The Oilers would have had to drive for 5, but ruined by the Oilers, and then the Oilers would have maybe had their drive for 5. But yeah, that's the end of it. Tomorrow, next time we'll be talking about the 1993 Toronto Maple Leafs. I have to. It's my team. Anyway, I'm Jeff. I'm gonna do.